Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Happy Cynics. We're going to continue in our deprogramming project, and we want to talk about a term that now is its usage is changed a bit. So we don't want to get hung up on the term itself, and that is cult. What we're interested in talking about is not so much what exactly is a cult or whatever, but the thing that we are focusing on has to do with mind control. Mind control, or let's say at least undue influence. Groupthink might be another way of talking about this. So you were saying that some of the academics, Isaac, are moving away from using the word cult.
Yeah, they call what we would in like popular culture refer to as a cult, like Heaven's Gate and
right,
the Branch Davidians, those sorts of groups. They're calling them new religious movements because there's not really a good way to differentiate when a cult becomes a religion.
Right.
And not all cults are like inherently violent or abusive.
Right.
According to the academic discourse of the time. But we're more talking about it in the popular sense of the term of like,
yes,
these are groups that have a lot of influence on their members, and members are discouraged from thinking for themselves.
Right. And members tend to have, and maybe I should say, maybe I could add a second characteristic, and this is typical, but I don't think this in and of itself is always as negative of a thing, but it's like excessive devotion. So sometimes cults historically have been defined by people having excessive devotion. So you could say that, rooting for a certain sports, like for example, Notre Dame football fans, you might say, kind of have a cultish following, like there's a lot excessive devotion, and same way with other things, like they may say, the like Star Trek people or the Star Wars people or Comic-Con or there's a lot of groups you might say have a cult following, but I'm not sure that all of those fall under, say, mind control or manipulation.
Yeah, it's important. Like the excessive devotion has to be something that is like intentionally built in to the group,
right,
from the top down.
Right. I mean, I don't think Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner were out there trying to get people in love with Star Trek. It just so happens.
Well, they were, but they were doing that by genuinely committing to creating a good product.
Yes, that's right. Right. So
rather than through, backdoor manipulation and brainwashing.
So let's start. And so really, I think the biggest characteristic of what we're talking about would be, maybe in layman's terms, the us versus them mentality. A lot of groups that start to function in a cultish way. There is this insider-outsider mentality. It's us against them. Everything tends to be polarized. Everything tends to be, there's protagonist and antagonist. There's the good folks and the bad folks. And a lot of this is perpetuated by simply, you can't trust anybody except us. That should be a red flag right there for anybody. And I don't care whether it's you're a member of Greenpeace or a Fox News listener, or you belong to some sort of church or religious organization or a mosque, whatever it may be. Whenever you cannot trust other people, and we're the only ones you can trust, everything else is fake, everything else is phony, that should be a red flag right there.
Yeah, if everybody else is under the influence of Satan,
right,
then,
or everybody else is an idiot, or a pawn, like a lot of. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're going down the same road I'm going. I mean, if I watched, in part of preparation for this, I watched a documentary about fundamentalist Mormon churches,
mm-hmm.
and they literally believe the minute you're out of the building you are being influenced by Satan. And anybody who's not part of the community is just pure evil.
Yeah, some of that kind of it reminds me of Martin Luther's hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God, and though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us."
Yeah, there's a sort of neurotic tendency that becomes, I think, psychotic in the community that it's expressed in.
Right. And the thing is, we naturally have a natural inclination that whenever when we sense that danger may be near, our fear is our defensive mechanism. And then groups use this to manipulate people because it's very difficult to overcome people trying to make you afraid of something. Because
right.
Deep down, you say, well, why take a chance? We might as well play it safe, right? And that ends up being kind of the hook that pulls everybody in.
Yeah, I think just to take a brief aside.
Yeah,
I think I used the terms neurotic, psychotic without those have different meaning than I think I would use them in pop culture.
Sure.
So just a quick definition: neurotic is just a tendency to internalize other people's opinions of you. Essentially, that's like the simplest version of it. Like, so you think that what everybody else thinks of you is really who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so in like religious ways, this would be really internalizing that sense of like, you're a sinner, you're guilty.
Right.
And you know, the world is full of devils, right?
Right. You're totally depraved.
Yes, exactly. And you like really, really internalize that until it becomes your whole reality. And that's like everything you think about yourself is based on what these other people are telling you. Whereas psychotic is where you take the inner world of your beliefs and project them onto reality.
Yeah. So
you go outside and you really do see devils everywhere.
Right. And a lot of these groups, then once you get people afraid, and then you say, okay, you can trust us. We're going to give it to you straight. We're going to tell you what the real story is. You can't trust everybody else out there. It's a conspiracy or a deep state or everybody's being led by Satan or whatever it may be. Okay.
Any political dissident is a terrorist.
Well, exactly. So like we're talking about any kind of group that exerts this kind of undue influence over people. It could be religious. It could be political. Those tend to be the two big ones. But it could be other things as well. But this distrust and fear then gets reinforced with a bunch of stereotyping. And confirmation bias starts to kick in. So, all right. I'm just gonna come out here and, for the sake of being honest, I will acknowledge, okay, that there is a certain amount of this that occurs on both sides of the spectrum. But right now, statistically speaking, I'm not just talking about my feelings or whatever. Statistically speaking, I've looked at studies of all, say, like the news organizations out there. The one that stands out as having the most influence over its viewers is Fox News. There is a bigger difference between Fox News viewers, those that rely on Fox News for their primary news, versus other people than any other news organization. There's a bigger gap. Yes, there are biases from CNN, MSNBC, other groups. Okay. Yes, that's acknowledged. But I'm going to mention Fox News a couple of times, probably in talking about this topic. Just keep in mind, I don't think that they're the only ones guilty of this, but I would say right now, they're the biggest player. I mean, in terms of the political realm, but now you have Trump. And so that's another thing. I don't remember any other Republican leaders that, like, Reagan never had this kind of, like, Reagan wasn't out, like this distrust of everybody else. I don't remember Reagan or anybody else using that kind of rhetoric except until Trump. Trump is the one that says, oh, well, whatever they say about me is not right. It's just a bunch of lies. It's fake news. And, whenever he would win a primary, even in the previous elections, he'd win a primary and it was great. Oh, that just proves everything, that he's the real deal. And then when he'd lose a primary, then he'd demand that it was a farce and there was some kind of fraud going on. And it's just so completely self-serving.
Well, he even turned on Fox News for saying
yes,
anything he didn't like.
He did. Whenever some of the Fox News hosts basically drew a line and said, we're not going there, then he turned on them. Yes, exactly right. Here's the thing, folks. I have your own opinions. That's the goal here. I don't think either. We've talked about this before, and Isaac and I do want to influence people. We do want people to think like us, but I'm more concerned. The primary concern is just least for people to think independently, and then we can go back to having dialogues in society instead of everybody. There is no dialogue whenever you've already been convinced that everybody else is a phony or can't be trusted or whatever. And based on what? It's just like a lot of stereotyping and criticizing everybody else.
Yeah, I think one of the most relatable examples of that stereotyping, at least to me, was people who, I never owned this label myself, but people who would call me an atheist or whatever.
Right.
They would say, well, you were never a true Christian.
Right.
That's a stereotype of, the quote unquote atheist or deconstruction experience.
Right.
Well, those people never really believed in the first place. So, they don't count. I've heard the exact same thing on the other side of atheists talking about figures like C.S. Lewis, who had this big conversion experience. Oh, well, they were never an atheist in the first place. Well, that's the same thing. That's a stereotype of the outside group, of the out group. Of just oh, well, we don't have to listen to them because they were never genuine in the first place.
Yeah, I will admit, I didn't say that. I have said in class, not that I doubt that Lewis was a genuine atheist. I think he was, but he was a different type of atheist. There's a difference between. Because Lewis,
old school atheism is not like Richard Dawkins' new atheism.
Well, what I want to say is there's a difference between somebody who emotionally cannot accept, they're upset because the concept of God or the divine that they have doesn't match the kind of world in which we live, and they're upset about that. Like C.S. Lewis wrote later, he says, I was mad at God for not existing.
Right.
Well, how that's different than a type of atheism where you think that there's not really basis for it and you're not really that emotionally invested in it to begin with. So somebody like Bertrand Russell was a different type of atheist. You don't there are people who get mad at God and they stop okay, when I was a pastor, there was a family I knew. There was a couple I knew, and they had a baby that had a bad congenital problem, and the baby suffered and struggled, lived to be, I think, about 2 years old before passing away. And I saw something similar to this even just in the past 15 years since I've been living here. But this goes way back. Well, I remember that after the baby died, the father said, oh, yeah, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God anymore. It began like the whole problem of evil thing. Okay.
Yeah.
But then later on, he ended up coming back around and reconciled with God. And then he started his own church, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a difference between people that emotionally can't accept that there's a God because they're frustrated in some way versus somebody that says,
Sure.
I would like to believe in God, but I just don't think there's any evidence for it. And I'm just not convinced that there is a God. That's a different type of atheism.
Part of the point I was trying to get at was that, like, when you say these, like, stereotypical, like, well, they were never, no true Scotsman, sort of responses, then, what you're failing to do is have any sort of empathy with that person,
right,
and understand what they're going through or where they're coming from.
Well, yeah, and it's an ad hominem fallacy. You attack the person, so that makes their ideas wrong. Well,
right, and all it does is reinforce that adherence to the group.
Right, exactly, because other people see through that type of criticism. And they should. So, let's say group mind control, I think, really starts with you first have to put up, say, the boundaries and the walls of we can't trust the outsiders. Okay, so this is your safe place. This is your safe space. This is where you're going to get told the truth. This is where everybody else. So I
can think of a few MLMs that work this way.
Okay, so
pyramid schemes.
Oh! I was just saying you have to remind me what MLM stands for.
Yeah, multi-level marketing.
Mary Lewis Moore or something. I always think MTM, Mary Tyler Moore. Okay, no, I get it. But I've heard some of this too, where you have people within a circle, like even say Christian higher ed. It's like, you should hear like some of the, well, you've heard them. I mean, some of the stereotypes about, say, state universities and colleges. I would say
party schools.
And let me, well, yes. Yeah. Everybody else, like all these, well, it's like that movie. What was that movie with, Dean Cain about the professor? It was like trying to destroy everybody's Christian faith.
It's got that one famous Christian Kevin Sorbo in it.
Yeah.
God's Not Dead.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
So that was very stereotypical. Now
I always thought they should have had you play that part, but
I don't know. I'm too short to be appealing on camera, I think. But I will say,
give
in
you some
fairness,
platform shoes.
I will say this. I do think, for example, some of the elite schools kind of operate in the same kind of mentality. So, like some of your Ivy League schools, it's like, well, us against them. They go to one of the little piddly schools, so they don't understand like we do. Some of this kind of snobbery. That's what's kind of funny in the movie Good Will Hunting, where Matt Damon's in that bar, and then this big ponytail dude's trying to like just cite people that he read, and then Matt Damon like says, "Yeah, I read that, and I read this. Did you read this?" And and so anyway, it's just kind of funny because I've encountered some of that in academia too, on the other side. So the boundaries, okay. So let's come back to this for a second. So before moving on, stereotyping. So to what extent do you think, do people end up not thinking? So what's the difference between somebody who can give a good reason of why they think a certain way versus, say, people that end up getting some kind of a canned response? So it's like the Jehovah's Witnesses that show up at your door. They've already been told like how to answer certain questions.
Yeah, there's this idea of like coaching.
Right.
So this is something that happens in like a lot of abusive relationships where a parent will coach an abused child how to answer when the teacher asks them about a bruise.
Right.
You see this also in these like cult-like groups, where they have these very common responses to arguments against their worldview. The one that comes to mind for me, because I watch their stuff for entertainment purposes, is Answers in Genesis.
Right.
Which is an organization that's just literally designed around coaching people's responses to arguments against a literal reading of the Bible.
Right.
And they sound all academically prepared and they're presented well. But if you listen with any sort of critical thought, you realize that they are just garbage. They're just liars. I mean, they're con artists.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does end up resorting to that a good bit. And we find the same thing, the same kind of biases in, say, political sphere, don't we?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think Fox News is very similar to Answers in Genesis in that sense. It's like, this is just here's all of the little quips you can use to shut down any sort of discussion.
Well, let's say even how the DNC talks about people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, they could never win because they'll never get the moderates.
No, they'll never get a fair hearing. Right. They just get stereotyped and they don't get really a fair hearing. And so basically, all right, that's where it starts, right? So the first thing you do is, if you want to dominate somebody, is you get rid of the competition. Okay? So this is how, like, historically, even say a lot of monarchies or tyrannical type governments start. When somebody comes to power, the first thing they do is eliminate the competition.
Right.
So,
well, I think there's another element. You have to be offering something that's impossible, but that somebody else desires, right? So like the monarch might be offering, well, I'll bring peace to the land.
Right. Yeah, you're promising that. Yeah. Right.
I'll make you feel happy or fulfilled or give you stability in community or something like that.
Yes. So this leads me to the next characteristic now. So what happens is, the first step is you get rid of all the competition, okay, by basically mislabeling everybody and just a bunch of fear-mongering and distrust and criticism. And then on the other side, you groom people for membership in the group because you want to win their loyalty. So what do? People get their self-esteem tied to the group, So, those terrible outsiders and those people, and they're this and they're that. But all you folks, you're great. You are the salt of the earth. You're the ones that are the true patriots or the true Christians or whatever it may be.
Right.
Okay. And so there's this feeling of superiority. You've already created this us against them. So now people who crave this kind of affirmation and self-worth and self-esteem, they get now emotionally invested in the group. They're getting their ego stroked by being a part of this group. So you end up with people who outside of this group are basically marginal. But inside this group, they feel like they are really super important. That's what's going on in this country politically right now. You have people whose opinions are minority opinions now. They used to be 40, 50 years ago, they used to be majority opinions. But most people now view these things a little differently. And these are the folks that, because they are no longer a majority, now they have to use some kind of coercion to try to keep imposing their views on everybody else.
And they're particularly vulnerable to this type of coercion because they have had this sort of like mythology of their once past greatness in this country, and their slow economic decline, the death of the middle class. They are looking for something like that.
Well, okay. Okay, so I brought this up before. There's a quote by George Eliot, okay, the author, who was, what was her real name? Marianne, the author, George Eliot. Marianne,
did they write,
her birth name was Marianne something, but that was George Eliot.
I have one of their books.
Well, anyway, she was...
Is it Silas Marner that they wrote?
I'm trying to remember. There's this one quote that basically... So here's the thing.
Yeah,
she talks
Silas
about
Marner.
The place where mediocrity gets really put on a pedestal is evangelical Christianity. The most popular forms of religion and politics these days are the ones that are really grassroots movements that oversimplify things and paint everything in black and white. Okay? And so here's the thing. Talking about this self-worth. I remember so many years. So I know I'm picking on the Christian church, but I think you'd find similar dynamics in other religions too. I remember as a young man, somebody saying, well, if God's called you into the ministry, then don't step down from that, even to even be president of the United States, because that's, such a noble calling. Okay. That's a nice thought. And it really did stroke my ego. But then I found that I was surrounded by a lot of people, because I had worked outside of ministry. I was an engineer for a couple of years. So I met different people. It kind of amazes me that what passes for excellence within some of these groups is not really that excellent. If these folks were on the outside, out in the outside world, they would be mediocre at best. But inside the group, they're like superstars.
Yeah.
Thing.
I saw this dynamic a lot at the college I attended.
Uh-huh. Yes.
We called it the bubble effect.
Yes.
Where people will try out for something, or get in a particular role, or win a particular award that was given out every year.
Right.
And they would be the man on campus.
Right.
And then the experience that was pretty universal was, once you leave this rather small Christian school, you have this reality check of, oh, nobody cares about me. I'm actually not a big deal.
Yeah, maybe it's not quite that harsh, but again, it's like you find out, and that's why people stay within these groups. And they don't, it's almost like Plato's cave. It's, you find security of being in this little group. Lest anybody think, so let me, in fairness, I'll come back away from religion. For example, people I went to high school with, it's like, I went to a high school, like I graduated from the largest graduating class ever in that school, and that was 83 people. The school's not even open. The high school's not even open anymore. It's now a middle school. It's been combined with another school. But it was a small school. All right. And the area is a small area. So the town where the school's at is probably about, 3,000 to 5,000 people, probably more like 3,000 people. And then the town, we lived in between two towns. One was about 1,100. The other one was about 1,500. Small. Okay. I went to school with a couple people who went on and got really good degrees. Some of them got degrees and then went out and lived in other places. But I know of a couple people who went and got like advanced degrees and such, but then they went back to live back in the home area. And I'm sorry. It's like when you start connecting with people like versus like on social media and such, you start to see like they kind of embrace this big fish in a small pond thing, because back home they're like a big deal, but they probably don't think, like in my mind, if they moved somewhere else they wouldn't be that exceptional.
Yeah, growing up in urban adjacent areas, I think prevented that experience from ever happening. I mean, it was not a small pond.
No, exactly.
It was a big pond, and it was a big pond that was joined with other bigger ponds. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think even people who live, say even in a bigger area, that may even for some of those folks even be a temptation to join one of these other groups.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe that could be an element in, I've been thinking also as like sort of an adjacent to this is like gang culture.
Right.
It tends to be more prevalent with like teenagers and young adults. And then most of the time people age out of it.
Right.
And I wonder if that's an element of this is our gangs cult adjacent cultures.
I would think so. I mean, a lot of these same dynamics that we're talking. So we think about the self-esteem that people get from these groups. There's obviously the feelings of superiority because everybody else is inferior, feelings of importance because everybody else is unimportant. That's bad enough. But then it starts to cross over into this notion that we're the only legitimate people. Everybody else is
the master race.
Right. Yeah. The master race mentality. And it's either we're the only patriots, we're the only people who believe in freedom, we're the only Christians, we're the only
true Scotsmen.
Yeah. We're the only true Muslims who follow the prophet or whatever, right. Whatever group it may be. Okay. So I'm sure that like some of these guys in Hamas, they consider themselves the true Muslims, and some of the more moderate Muslims, no, they're not real. They're not real Muslims. They're sellouts. Okay.
Right.
And that's what kind of happened with the Ottoman Empire. It's like, and Iran, when it was starting to become a little more secularized in the middle of the 20th century. But that's kind of the same thing. And now we've got some of that kicking back again in the United States and in parts of Europe too. So anyway, this feeling of illegitimacy. So what do you think are some of the ways that are more common to make people feel like everybody else is illegitimate, or are you not really equipped to, I don't want to put you too much on the spot here. So how do you think they maintain this? So how is this, I think this does tie into say like feelings, but so how does this tie into, say like the distrust of others? So,
well, so back to my research that I was doing on the fundamentalist Mormons,
right?
They choose their own prophet, or their prophet's appointed by God,
right?
And so legitimacy comes directly from the word of the prophet, and famously, it's Warren Jeffs for the fundamentalist Mormon Church, who's in prison, and has done very horrible things with that amount of power. So that idea, I think it has to stem from that central leadership
Now,
to
this
say
isn't
like,
the main.
well,
This isn't the main body of Church of Jesus Christ of
no,
Latter-day
this
Saints.
is the fundamentalists, like
Okay,
out in the boonies.
I just want to clarify that for the listeners.
These are polygamists. These are
right.
Yeah, these are not Mormon. These are not Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, not
people.
Salt Lake City
No.
LDS folks. No.
But that aspect of, well, we're legitimate because our leader is legitimate, I think plays a pretty crucial role in how these group dynamics play out.
Well, that's one way. Don't you think some of it though comes from like either like tradition?
Well, I think that leader's the prophet's word
Right.
can be projected into the future, right, throughout time. So that might be a sacred text, that might be, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And only our reading of the sacred text is legitimate.
Yeah, and that's what I find interesting. So, okay, here's the question. And maybe this really can't be answered. Maybe it doesn't have an answer. So I'm thinking that there are some groups that have this control that are driven by a more, say, charismatic leadership. So everything kind of rises and falls, like everybody's just following the leader. And then there are others that it really comes back to some sort of foundational writings or something. So we're talking about this being fundamentalist. So this is different, though, than, say, Protestant Christian fundamentalism in the sense of got to follow the Bible literally.
Well, they take the Book of Mormon and all of their sacred writings very literally.
Yes.
But those writings put a lot of power in the hands of the current prophet.
Yes, they do. They do. So
like another way I would think about this that might be a little easier to grasp would be like constitutionalists. Say
right.
like, oh, well,
so I'm thinking, yes, Constitution or a mission statement, or
the founders had it
sort.
Perfect. The framers of our country framed the country perfectly.
Right.
We can make amendments as we need to, so it's flexible. We just need if the country was just based on the Constitution, everything would be perfect.
Yes. Yes.
And also, crime should be illegal. It's like our country is based on the Constitution.
Right. And this is part of this, like these are tools that are used to say, to criticize outsiders or discourage dissent. That's another part. Kind of getting ahead of myself here in the outline I had, but dissent is discouraged. So, honestly, I'm rubbed the wrong way when I hear things like, oh, we got to fight against mission drift. So in other words, it's like, or these people say that we have to be strict reconstructionists of the Constitution.
Right.
I know that, on one hand, we don't want like courts that are just making up law by fiat. But on the other hand, this business of like somehow the Constitution is not subject to some level of interpretation, that's bogus as well.
Well, but their interpretation of it is perfect.
Well, that's the point.
And that's the thing that they don't say out loud.
Well, they don't want to acknowledge that they're interpreting. So
right.
It's just like,
it's Martin Luther's idea of the perspicacity of Scripture. Right. Well, if people just read the Scripture right, it would be obvious what it means.
Right. Exactly. Yes. And so there's this, and really, what is this other than just ways of shooting down dissent or disagreement.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that they get like those things that are designed to discourage dissent also get tied in with that promise of offering you something that is fulfilling, right? It gets tied back into the self-esteem.
Well, sure.
It's all knit together, right? Well, your
ahead.
self-esteem is tied to my interpretation of the scriptures now.
Yeah. Okay.
So you can't leave.
And that's kind of how they kind of tie the ribbon and put the bow on the package with the self-esteem. People end up having their self-esteem in the group because what the group does is it only values the members to the extent that they contribute to the group.
Right.
Members aren't valued for their own sake. You're only valued to the extent that you can become a poster child for the organization. If you're not a poster child for the organization, then you're kept in the background.
Yeah, or you're excommunicated.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And when people become visible and they're visible dissenters, then they're quickly disposed of. That happens in a lot of these groups.
Yeah, and it's not always like a loud disposal. A lot of times it's just the group inherently unconsciously knows who are the people you don't associate with, who are the undesirables.
Right, exactly. So here we have, all right, we're seeing the building, how this starts to build. The groups, they start by, again, you get rid of all the competition. You discredit everybody else who would have a different opinion. Then you basically cultivate this need for the group. So people end up tying their self-esteem to the group. And then once that happens, they start to basically identify themselves more as a group member and not as an individual.
Right, exactly.
And before long, they've lost their individuality. So everybody's given some kind of a label. You're a conservative, you're a liberal, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a Christian, you're a Muslim, or you're a pagan, or whatever you may be. An atheist. So anyway, but everybody's given some kind of a label or a tag. Everybody is sorted and put into these kind of categories. All right. And then how does group identity gets cultivated through loyalty. So there's this, okay, everybody's got it. Everybody takes the oath. Everybody takes the pledge. Everybody salutes. Everybody sings the song together.
Everybody says the creed.
Yes, everybody recites it together. And so this group mentality starts to take over the individual's mind. So it, and there's different ways people get rewarded for their loyalty. Those that don't show loyalty, they're kind of watched with a suspicious eye, you know.
Right.
Kept in a safe place where they can't do too much damage. You know, the group doesn't want there to be too much disturbance because then that starts raising questions for some of the other group members.
Right.
So it's like when there ends up being some kind of a sacrificial lamb or a scapegoat, you have to find some way to discredit that person and make them just seem really evil or insidious or whatever.
Yeah, I remember, maybe this is too personal of a story, but I started a philosophy club while I was in college.
Yes.
Which you're very aware of.
I'm aware of.
And we were talking about things people did not want us to talk about, which were not even like that out of bounds.
Yeah, I didn't think it was that bad.
I had one of my peers begin to spread false rumors that I was going around being the thought police.
Oh.
And that, I was manipulating people to, believe a certain way, or, I mean, it was just like really heinous stuff, none of which was true. Because I ruffled some feathers.
Yes. Yes. And you know what's also interesting then. So like all group dynamics, and this is true of every group. Okay. So not just the groups of control, but all groups rely on trust and cooperation and a certain amount of loyalty. Okay. It's just like even belonging to society. I mean, we all want to be able to trust that other people are going to not break the law every day. So like in my book project, I talk about, in my book, I give the example. We all drive down the highway and we're just trusting everybody's going to stay on the right side of the road, at least in this country. Okay. There are occasional situations where people don't, but, we have ways of punishing these people and things like that. But for the most part, we're trusting that everybody else wants to be safe. And so everybody's going to stay on their own side of the road. And so we can pass them going, however fast we're going and, not necessarily be scared out of our wits.
Yeah. I was, driving in Chicago with my wife. This was when she had first moved to the area.
Right.
And she was just like, I don't understand how you drive in Chicago. I said to her, you just have to realize nobody wants to take time out of their day to deal with an accident.
Right.
So if you're in standstill traffic and you need to get over a lane, you just sort of nudge your way in there, and the guy might be frustrated at you, but he's going to let you in because he's not going to hit your car.
Right.
You just get in the way.
Right. And that's why he'll be frustrated, because he will not take action because it's too much of a hassle.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not worth it. And that's how all traffic in Chicago works.
Oh,
like,
yes.
Nobody wants to get in an accident. Nobody wants to deal with this today. So we're all just these are the terms everybody, I think, has just sort of silently accepted in the city. I guess you're going to cut in front of me then. Fine.
Now that our son lives in Chicago, I've done a fair amount of driving up there. And so, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Oh my, driving on the Dan Ryan. Now that's really a test of wills. Anyway.
Yeah, it's 10 lanes across.
Yeah. Well, you have your express lanes. Okay. So the express lanes where you don't have any exits, and then every 3 or 4 exits, then there's a crossover point where you go to the outer lanes.
Into the highway.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but, sometimes, man, there's some people just zig in and out, and oh my golly, we were going up last weekend, and I mean, somebody was changing lanes. It almost looked like you were going on a 45-degree angle between two vehicles.
To the highway.
Yeah. Oh my golly, it was really something. But you have to be careful. But the thing about group membership, okay, and because their groups need cooperation, there end up being litmus tests for members.
Right.
Groups have ways of trying to identify who is a potential defector, who is a potential betrayer. Okay. And so you have to have these litmus tests. Now, the more control a group wants to have, the greater the litmus tests are. You have to jump through certain hoops to prove you're one of us. You have to do certain things. And there ends up being this high accountability for members. And the more control the group wants to have, the more it's got to control each individual member. And a lot of times it's through these litmus tests or these conditions of membership. Okay. So this could even be, say, like a characteristic of the local country club. We don't want certain kinds of people in here. We only want certain ones. So you have certain membership requirements that basically are going to sift out the people that you don't really want in the club. See? And
right.
you just make it so that it's too difficult for outsiders to want to come in and try to blend in.
Yeah, so for the fundamentalist Mormons,
Yes.
there's the 10% tithe on
Right.
everything. Everybody pays.
Right.
But if you wanted to be part of the inner circle of these very wealthy businessmen that had this sort of business club through the church, you tithed 20%. And then you got access to the like upper echelon.
And that takes me to the next step here in our outline.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because in all these groups, there ends up being an inner circle of people, and everything's controlled by the inner circle. So even within these groups, you can have membership in it, and you can be just a member, but then everything's controlled. It's not democratic control. They don't want democratic control. Everything is being centrally controlled, top down. Okay. They don't want dissent. Outside opinions are discouraged. They may give people a chance to give feedback, but then 99 times out of 100, the feedback's never heeded anyway. It's just allowing people to vent and feel like their voice is being heard, but they're still going to end up doing the same thing anyway.
This is maybe not the best example, but my brother works for a company where he has to go to a quarterly meeting.
Right.
With all of the corporation.
Oh, okay.
And at this meeting, you can submit questions for the like C-class executives beforehand and ask them at this meeting, and there's like an open floor for questions. And it's a very big company. And so my brother was at these meetings one time and went up to one of the persons who had asked a question.
Right.
And he asked this person, how did you get this? Like, how did you submit this? I have a few questions I'd like to ask at the next one. And they told him, oh, this was given to me by the C-class team. Like, none of these are real questions from other management or other workers. These are all just staged to make the C-class executives look good.
like,
well, that's a cult.
Some like some of the comedians. Like, I was thinking that like some of that happened in like Rodney Dangerfield's recordings, like
plants with the
no
hecklers
respect
and stuff.
Yeah. Like the questions at the end. Because he had a joke ready. Hey, Rodney, were you given respect in high school? Like, are you kidding? How would you like to share lockers with a mop? Or so anyway, kind of a setup there. And the thing is with these inner circles, they're going to control who gets access to the inner circle, and they do this by promotion from within. The top leaders end up having very little accountability, and they will accept people who come into the group later. Like, usually they want people that have been conditioned from childhood on up, like, and are loyal to the group. People that have spent time outside the group and then join later, you're given some access if they believe you're trustworthy, but you're not going to get into the inner circle. There's going to be
you have to go through catechism to be a member.
Well, yeah, but it's like most of the people that get to the very top echelons are people that have been in the group like pretty much their entire lives.
Right.
And so these are the people that are least likely to veer off course.
They have the most vested interest.
Exactly right. They have the most interest in keeping things going in the same direction.
Yeah, I think that results in, I think this is like one of the hardest things to uncover in these cult-like groups or these like cultish communities.
Right.
Is that leadership tends to be disingenuous. Would be the word I would choose. So the leadership might have doubts about the whole structure of the thing.
Right.
But because they have this vested interest,
Right.
they'll never voice those doubts. They'll never consider even their own thoughts as legitimate.
Right. Right.
Right. And that's the, like, I think the real danger of these is that, like, because they're so emotionally invested, even their own conscious reason is circumvented. I think you see this a lot with, like, I personally know several young pastors who have dissenting beliefs from the denominations they serve in, but because they're employed and that's their only means of making a living, they can't be genuine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of these, there's like a stereotype. Maybe this is me stereotyping people, but people who say, like, well, it's okay to say I don't know about certain things and just not form an opinion. Well, but you know what you really think about it.
Oh, right. Right.
You're just kind of hiding behind that phrase.
Yeah. And that's true.
I think a lot of times the center leader, right, the top leader,
right,
never believed, knew that they're a con artist. I mean, there's all these people who don't think climate change is real, but we have on video executives from gas companies admitting, oh, well, we're just gaslighting everybody.
That is an interesting. Okay, so that's something I don't know how much you've how familiar you are with Christopher Hitchens.
I know of.
Okay, all right. So that was one thing about him that I'm not sure how I felt about it. Like he was convinced. Like have you ever heard of what was the guy's name? Charles Templeton. The guy, like, for example, he was the one who was the early evangelism partner of Billy Graham.
Oh yeah.
Okay, have you ever heard this story? So he cites this, and then in the Lee Strobel book, I think he interviewed Templeton because, like, when they were young and starting out, Templeton started to have doubts about the truth of Christianity and religion altogether, and he claims, all right, that he went to that he talked to Billy, like he told Billy Graham, I can't keep doing this. I'm just not convinced about what we're doing. And then he claims, well, Billy Graham's like, well, it's too late to back out now. And that supposedly he just kept going with it, even though he had some of the same doubts or whatever. Now, Christopher Hitchens uses that story. See, I'm not necessarily convinced that Billy Graham was a fraud. Like, Hitchens thinks that Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell.
Oh yeah,
were frauds because not just the Templeton story, but like some of the stuff that Falwell said, he was convinced that there's no way he could have believed that. Well, I don't think Hitchens has been in some of these communities where, I mean, people actually do have some of those beliefs. Now, I'm not talking about like just evangelical Christianity, but I'm talking about like the things where
I think the most obvious example is Trump.
Well, yeah.
Was a Democrat his entire life.
Yes.
And now is the most far right Republican.
Well,
and it's all, I don't really think he believes a word of what he says.
Well,
I think he just wants power, and that's what con artists do.
And let's be truthful here, though. I don't think that Trump has come out and said, this is what I think. He just says, we're going to get rid of these,
Yeah.
He's using the
there's
rhetoric.
No content.
He's using the rhetoric, but I'm not saying that Trump's an honest guy. I don't think he's quite the liar that some people claim that he is, because he's.
Well, but about like, I never broke the law. I never did this. I never did that. That's all just lies.
That is. But in terms of like like he said what he'll do if he gets power again. He said like,
oh yeah, he's an honest con artist.
That's what I'm saying. He it's a certain type of deceit, but not everything he says is deceitful. And like people don't care. Like, because if they get the Supreme Court justices that they want, that was what he promised. Now he promised people a wall. He wasn't able to deliver on that. Okay. But we'll get Supreme Court justices. We're going to do this and that and the other. Well, he just promised to deliver this to the people if they would vote for him. So he was basically, okay, this is the deal. You vote for me, you'll get this. And that's what he tried to deliver. That's what he delivered. Okay. I think
what he was really offering was, I'm going to legitimize and bring back the glory days.
No, that's true. That's true.
And that's why it's not the Trump cult, it's the MAGA cult. Right? It's the Make America Great Again cult.
Right.
That he just happens to be the leader of.
Right, exactly. He organized the dissidents into a movement, is what he did.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what he did. But
I don't really think that he identifies with the dissidents.
No,
and that's where I think he's being disingenuous, right? That's the lie. That's the lie of the promise that he's making.
Yeah, and he's like, I love uneducated voters, and you know.
Well, he does. They work for him.
Well,
to the point where they're useful, and then he throws them into the machine.
Okay, so that's one type, but okay, so what? Like coming back to Jerry Falwell and like Pat Robertson. They both, like after Hurricane Katrina, they both made similar statements that God was punishing New Orleans for all of its debauchery and accepting homosexuality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those kind of statements, that was what Hitchens was like, oh, they can't really believe that. Well, I think now we see there are a lot of people that do still think that way. Okay, so even that carries it a step further. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, I believe it's wrong, I don't think we should have same-sex marriage, but then to somehow interpret a natural disaster as a direct act of God, as God's punishment, that's very presumptive and very arrogant in my opinion. And also
very dark.
Yeah, I mean, who are these guys to speak for God anyway?
But it does slightly legitimize violence against certain groups.
It does. It like basically says, it's not really encouraging it, but it's not doing anything to discourage it either. It's like it's advocating that it's okay to hate these people. And then because people take their hatred and act on it in violent ways, then they say, we never encourage anybody to commit violence. But if you incite hatred, do you not think that it's eventually going to lead to violence?
I think
that's the thing.
There's an interesting like social dynamic to the hatred of the out group, in that these cultish communities tend to generate cults in their opposed group, right? So, and maybe not cults, but like they tend to create a coalescence of the out group into a new community, right? So the marginalization of the LGBTQ community created the LGBTQ community. And that dynamic plays out everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And those, it's interesting, cults can kind of give birth to opposite cults, to anti-cults, matter and antimatter.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I guess so. I'm not sure how I feel, because you said about the leaders know better. That's what I'm still like, what all this has been a reaction to.
Subconsciously, but
I would say that, okay, it might be fair to say that probably the vast majority of leaders realize that it's not as simple as they're representing it and that the group wants to believe that it is. But they keep those opinions to themselves.
Right.
And I think that's a fair assessment. Now,
or I mean, to me, I'm speaking specifically about those like kind of extreme abusive cults.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know if this is like present in every group that doesn't encourage critical thinking.
Right.
But I think there are cultish dynamics to leadership that isn't genuine in its wholehearted, endorsement of these beliefs.
Yes.
That they're espousing.
Yeah.
I think that's immoral. I think it's, epistemically problematic.
No, exactly. So, to kind of maybe bring this toward a close, before we close it, I would like to just kind of maybe for a few minutes talk about who are the people that are most susceptible to this group influence and mind control. I think everybody, I think some of the biggest characteristics, some of them are pretty obvious, like people that are naive or who don't really have much perspective. They, again, somebody that's been raised in a certain environment where they've never even heard different opinions. It's kind of like Plato's cave. It's easier to keep somebody in a cave that's never seen the outside world. People in the outside world, it takes a lot more that know about an outside world. It takes a lot more to draw them into a cave and keep them there. Okay. And then there are some people, I think, that perhaps they don't have the critical thinking skills. This is where once you get people to distrust other opinions, a lot of people, you're going to have them because they may not be able to see through the half-truths and the distortions that they're being fed on their own. They would have to get that from somebody else, and if they're unwilling to listen to other sources to compare, how are they ever going to know the difference? How would anybody know whether the news source, wherever they're getting their news from, whether they're biased or not, if you don't listen to other news reports?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? If I spend my whole life listening to nothing but CNN, how can I judge whether they're being biased unless I listen to how other groups are reporting the same news? And if I discover stuff that CNN is overemphasizing or leaving out, or Fox News or MSNBC or whomever it may be, Al Jazeera, I don't know. How am I being influenced? And then you ask yourself, what's the motivation here? Who's benefiting from this? The thing is, I think you and I both agree that the biggest factor is this emotional need.
Yeah.
This emotional attachment, because there's a certain codependency that people end up having of needing to belong to the group. Everybody needs groups, but then some people get convinced that this is the only place that will accept me or I'll fit in. And so this is my group. These are my people. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about who is this episode for?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are going to say like, oh, well, my group doesn't do all of those things, so they're not a cult.
Right.
But I really think any of the characteristics we've described today are problematic enough that they would justify leaving a group.
Yes. Yes.
If any dissent is discouraged, if you are only if you're only adhering to the group because of fear or lack of empathy with outsiders and really understanding different perspectives, any of these sort of practices, any of these characteristics in a group, I think are unethical. and have no place in modern society.
No.
So I think part of the takeaway for me from this episode is that those of us who have escaped these sort of ways of thinking need to be safe places for those who still do this, but also those who to be a place for questioning, to give room for that.
Right.
And also, I think this episode is for people who are, if you've been listening and you're like, oh, my group kind of does that. Well, that's a red flag. It's not good.
Right.
And it might be hard, but you need to think very carefully about your place in that group.
Yeah, and maybe find a different group. There are all kinds of groups of people that you can associate with and derive the benefits of friendship and socialization. And that's a healthy thing. But again, this business of like, well, you can't see life outside of the group, that now starts to become problematic, because now you are defining yourself as a group member, not as an individual.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, this may apply to, we're not interested in basically putting the label cult on particular groups, but to talk about characteristics that make groups cultish, and where groups have more influence over members than they ought to have. Because whenever we give up our individual minds, we're giving up the most precious part of ourselves. If you don't think so, then ask yourself, how many people fear dying with dementia? Because once you lose your mind and your ability to think, you lose your identity, everything. It just all goes out the window, and you're just existing for just basic impulses and feelings and needs being met. Your life loses its meaning. And you don't even have to have dementia to do that. You can lose that in group dynamics.
Right. You can disappear into the crowd.
Exactly. Just become another number or another supporter or whatever.
Another sheep in the flock.
Yeah. They'll say they value you, but if they're only valuing you, if their valuing you is only in the context of how you contribute to the group, well, are they really valuing you as an individual? Or are they just valuing you as a member?
One of the examples we didn't get to that I think is really important is when leaders appeal to it as a way of circumventing reason and giving you that like emotional kick of belonging. If they say like, oh, well, it's just not, it's beyond human reason for us to understand this. Why did God let my baby die? No, we can't understand that. If that is the nature of truth in the group, then there is no belief at all, because human reason is all we have. We can't help but use human reason. Right. And if the leader is claiming that he knows things that are beyond human reason, they're lying.
Right. Yeah, they're either...
I know the nature of God, but the nature of God is beyond human reason.
Yeah.
That's a nonsense argument.
Right.
And it's a sign of abuse.
Yeah, the person's either a fool or a liar. Because it can't be true. It just can't be true. That is important. And so it's really important that we get our emotional needs met from people and in places where we're not being manipulated, and we are intrinsically valued. We're not
and dissent is encouraged.
Right. Right.
Okay. So like think back to like COVID.
Right.
If everybody in the room was like, mask and vaccines are great, which I personally believe. And one person thinks differently and they feel like, oh, if I dissent from this prevailing opinion, I will no longer be welcome here. I don't want to be part of that.
No.
Like, and I feel very strongly that vaccines and masking work and are important.
Right.
And I think, you know, I don't have any like quibbles about that, but I wouldn't dissociate from a friend who held different beliefs on this from me.
Yeah. So, and this is a good illustration because,
and it's not just about one-on-one friendship; it's about the whole community.
Well, right. Okay, so this happened in real life here. My wife, where she works, and she works at a hospital. Some of her coworkers end up losing their jobs because they refuse to get vaccinated. Okay. Now she didn't disassociate with them or unfriend them or, write them off or whatever. There is a point where the group has a right to say, we don't feel safe. And we don't feel that the patients are safe if you're not vaccinated. There's a difference. If somebody, here's the thing, something like COVID, there's an argument that, okay, if you're not vaccinated, then I want to be careful being around you until I'm vaccinated or whatever.
Sure.
That sort of thing. But like if it was more of the masking thing, I think was the big thing, because before the vaccinations come out, the only protection we had were the masks. And so there's a difference between saying, okay, well, we should limit contact. How about if we talk on the phone or whatever? Don't have to disown somebody. But there's a difference between something that poses a demonstrable health risk to somebody versus
I think
somebody just having a different opinion on how things ought to proceed. Anyway.
There are points at which excommunicating people from a community is appropriate.
Yeah.
But none of those places at any point are unjustifiable, and they're not trying to skirt around reasonable thinking.
Yes. Yes.
They're not just relying on emotional appeals to group adherence. They are clearly articulated rationales.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole rhetoric, I mean, that might be a different episode, but the whole rhetoric of cancel culture and what does that mean? And that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And yes, there is a part of that I do not support. But then sometimes that rhetoric is just used for people who don't really want to have to take other people's ideas into consideration, and they think that they can they can just close their minds and ears to everybody else, and everybody's still supposed to have open arms to them.
Maybe we'll title this episode "Cancel Cult Your."
Yeah, cancel cult your. Anyway, that's a good. I never thought about that.
Maybe we'll end on a little bit more of a lighthearted
culture. Join us. We put the cult in culture.
That's our tagline now.
Never thought about that, but cult being part of culture. So anyway, that's interesting. Well,
the word cult is in a lot of words.
What's
Cultivate.
That? Yes. Yeah.
It all derives from the same ancient word, which just means
like a group.
To like worship or like agriculture is just like the worship of plants, basically.
Group commitment or group bonding or loyalty to some cause or entity or something like that.
Mostly a deity. Yeah.
Yes. Right. It is interesting though. So, well, Isaac, is this a good stopping spot, you think?
I think so. I think it would be good to end on a lighthearted note.
Yeah, let's do that. So anyway, you can think about this word again when you get your next strep throat culture.
Yes.
The virus is trying to take over your throat. Well, anyway. All right. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. As always, we welcome your input. Reach out to us. the Happy Cynics at gmail.com, and leave us a comment on Spotify, Apple podcasts, wherever you're picking up our podcast. We'd love to hear from you. And
if you've enjoyed it, tell a friend.
Yeah, absolutely. We would like to build up our audience. And I've already got some ideas. Maybe I've been told we need to have some merchandise. So anyway, and this is I haven't run this by you yet, but this is kind of what I'm thinking about as a catchphrase for us. And it'd be great on our merchandise. The Happy Cynics, because brilliance deserves an audience.
It's maybe a little bit self-inflating, but
why not? Anyway,
I think we should sell thinking caps that have our logo
that'd
on
be
them.
Good with propellers on them
And a little light bulb coming out of the top.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've enjoyed our time here with you, and we hope you have too. Hope this will help you, not only in your own life, but I'm sure somebody that you know that perhaps you can be of help to. Have a good day. Take care of yourselves, and you'll be hearing again from us really soon.